It's time to begin. Go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're in Luke chapter 16. The context of this is that Jesus was at the home of a tax collector, or the home of a Pharisee. And we talked about parables of lost things on Sunday, looking at how much of what Jesus says is directed to the Pharisees and dealing with their self-righteousness. And we finished up by talking about the parable of the lost sons. And noticed how, by the end, what you see is that these two brothers are, at first glance, they appear to be very different. But if you pay close attention to them, what you find is that they're the same. They're very much the same. They're two brothers who try to go about getting their father's stuff in different ways. They're both concerned about the father's stuff and not the father. And that's where there are similarities. And I think it shows, in a lot of ways, it shows sort of these two paths that we tend to take, one of two paths, to get something that we think we're supposed to get at the end. Whether it's through self-discovery, the son that left home, I think, is a good representation of self-discovery. And the other path is just moral compliancy, right? The one who never left. He just always did what he was supposed to do. And but both of them, at the end, they both want to know, what do we get? Give me what's mine. And so both have some different problems there. Chapter 16 tonight deals with the subject of stewardship. And it seems to be that this is just a continuation of what Jesus has been talking about. And stewardship or discipleship, you're kind of splitting hairs about the differences, but really the idea of stewardship is where this first parable comes from. It gives us an illustration of a steward, a manager, and Jesus uses this parable to make a point about how we are to go about growing the kingdom. I have here, it's a strange parable of the dishonest manager. If I was going to give it a title, I would call it Strange Parable, because it just seems strange. And maybe Jesus, in his teaching, this isn't where he starts. That this is after you've heard him teach for a while and you've had time to listen to him. That maybe now we're going to talk about this parable. It certainly gets you thinking. And when the points that are made are good points to make. And I thought, well, I could make those points in a different way than he did. Or he certainly could have made the point in a different way. But it hopefully it'll get the wheels turning a little bit. So in verse 1 it says, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So the he's not done a very good job. He called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. The manager said to himself, now he's thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What shall I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have to decide what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. He said to another, how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into their eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is dishonest in much. If then you've not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, will you entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he'll hate the one and love the other, or else he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed it. We'll talk more about the reaction in a minute. I read that at the end just to make the point that this is directed to them. So rather than think, this sounds strange to us, how would it sound to them? They're the ones to whom it's directed. So this manager, you think, had he been this shrewd in the first place, maybe he would have been a better manager. But here he is. He realizes that he's going to lose his job. And then what is he going to do? What does he seem to be concerned about?
The next phase of his life. He said, I can't dig and I don't want to beg, so I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. What's the next phase of his life? How's he going to earn a living? His very limited options, as people would have had very limited options in that world. And given the position that he has, it's quite a prestigious position. He's not on the same level as the guy who would have been, digging a ditch. What else is he concerned about? His reputation. You don't want to beg.
Yeah, his reputation. He's too ashamed to beg. But he's concerned about. He mentions about being received into other people's houses. Nobody's going to want to have anything to do with me. He's concerned about his status, which is interesting. I think that's relatable. So he says, okay, he's got a plan. So what's his plan? What's he do?
Gets part of the money.
Gets part of the money.
Right.
Gets part of the money. He starts wheeling and dealing, right? And is he doing this so his master can recoup his money? Is that what he's thinking about?
Making friends.
He's making friends. Okay, the master, that relationship is ended. That relationship's overdone. He's thinking about the future. And so all these people, these debtors, they're going to remember me now. I cut them a deal, gave them a break. And so when I'm fired and put out, then they'll be nice to me, or maybe they'll help me in some way. So it seems, the question is Jesus, is he encouraging dishonesty? Is that what he's doing? What's his point? What's he trying to convey?
When you read that last verse, that made me think of, is he comparing the Pharisees to somebody who hasn't really done the right work for God, and they're not even smart enough to be good to their followers? They're going to be out in both ways.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, that could be part of it. I mean, he's much of what he says is directed to them, and this is kind of the middle of everything, because they ridicule him, and then he's going to respond, and as if the point wasn't made clear, he makes it clear in what he says following. Is Jesus encouraging dishonesty? No, we know that. Okay, we know that, right? So what is he encouraging? What's his point? Think? Okay.
How about prudence and urgency?
All right. Hey, way to go. Way to go. I ask real tough questions. Prudence. So yeah, you've got to think. He's trying to. He's sometimes the word shrewd. He's very shrewd in his dealings. I kind of relate this to what Jesus says about you got to be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. He's encouraging prudence and earnest and urgency. You know, this guy doesn't have time to waste. He's in a hurry, and so he's doing as much as he can in just a short time. So he's setting himself up. He's setting himself up. The point here or part of what he's getting at is using our wealth, using our resources wisely. Unrighteous mammon. Mammon is an Aramaic word, and it also has you can look at how it was used in the Middle Ages. It's like a demon. We say when you see the word mammon, you say, oh, it means money or it means riches. But it does, but it has a very, very negative connotation. You especially get that in the Middle Ages when you got the King James version of your Bible where that word is used. And he says it's unrighteous mammon. Money. There is no righteousness in money. Okay? It's just money. And the idea of righteousness being attached to that is, that there's status in money. At least that's the thinking of that's how we think. Certainly is how the Pharisees, they had money. They had money, and it was to them, that was their status. That's what they trusted in. And so this is cutting against that grain somewhat. He's saying, well, what do you do with it? What do you do with your resources? Do you use your resources to the glory of God, to grow the kingdom, to make eternal friends? I think it's the point that Jesus is making. You're using your physical resources, your unrighteous money. You're using it to the glory of God, and so you can make heavenly friends. So here we are. We don't have a lot of time, right? We are stewards. We're disciples. We're supposed to be sharing in the ministry of Jesus. We have opportunity. We have time. We have resources, but it's not unlimited. So what are you doing with what you have today to set yourself up for the future? And I think that's what Jesus is part of what he's getting at as far as his disciples are concerned in using this strange parable here. You have anything you'd like to add about the point that he makes? Part of the principle that he mentions about whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. Maybe part of the point here too is in how we use our resources, how we handle our money. Our relationship to money, to wealth, reveals the heart, and that certainly is in keeping with what Jesus tries to teach along those lines. When you go to the Matthew 6 and the Sermon on the Mount, where he deals with this topic, wealth is never condemned in the Bible. What is condemned is the relationship to it, and what it's used for. For the Pharisees, that's what contributes to their righteousness. So they think the status that they have, and of course that's not the case at all. I think that's why Jesus would refer to unrighteous. When we see unrighteous wealth, we're thinking like, well, did they steal this money? Is there something wrong with it? Money has a function. It has a purpose in the world. So if we keep going, though, we see that they ridicule this. And Jesus responds to them. And now we get Jesus dealing really with their attitudes and their heart. We get a sense of their perspective on God, their perspective on the law, and Jesus exposes them again here. So in verse 15, in response to their ridicule, Jesus says, you are those who justify yourselves before men. Now, how do they justify themselves before men? Well, look at our status. Look at our status. Clearly, that keeping up appearances, that's what they obsessed over. He says, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. And again, it's real easy for us to just point fingers at the Pharisees. It's harder to think about ourselves and what we're doing to exalt ourselves, because we continue to struggle with the same issues of status. We care about what people think of us, and he says, for what's exalted among men is an abomination to God. That's a very, very strong statement that Jesus makes here. God values something different. He's concerned about something different. He says the law and prophets were until John. Since then the good news of the kingdom of God is preached, and everyone forces his way into it. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one dot of the law to become void. Now he's exposing their hearts, and now he's getting to how they have used the law. He says everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. Here he cites an example of how they had misused the law. We don't have time to get into all of that. This comes up in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus, there's other occasions where he's more expansive in his explanation. But they didn't care about faithfulness in a marriage, right? They just if you want to divorce your wife, if you find some reason to divorce her, just make sure it's legal. Have it, get it in writing and go through the process, and that's that. And Jesus cites it as an example of, well, their hard hearts. That's what he says about why Moses gave you makes it legal. You were hard-hearted people. You were going to divorce they were divorcing their spouses, whether they were going to have a legal process or not. Even Moses acknowledges the problem is the heart, and that's their problem. They trust in their status, in their wealth. They trust in their own misguided interpretations of the law. They trust in their opinions. That's what, by this point, when you see Jesus talking about the commands of the fathers, the commands of the elders, you're getting into the issues of the Midrash and the Mishnah, all of these opinions that came down from Sanhedrin councils over generations, and that's what mattered to them, not the law and the intention of the law. The intention of the law of Moses was to change the heart, and that's, by this point, it's just lost on them. What kind of a man just divorces his wife because he woke up one day and felt like it? That's the kind of point Jesus is making here to them. So they justified themselves before men, but Jesus says they'd be exposed by God. That's what's happening there. That's what's happening there in what he's telling them. And then we come to another familiar parable, but here's the context. The Pharisees are like the rich man. They're like the rich man in this parable. The rich man who ignored the beggar that was at their gate. Again, what kind of a man would ignore a beggar who is at his gate? A good man? A righteous man? No, not at all. A man who's cold-hearted would ignore a beggar at his doorstep. And Jesus, he describes this scene, but it's in reference to them and this issue of status and wealth that he's dealing with. So in verse 19 it says, there was a rich man who's clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day, and at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger into water and cool my tongue, for I'm in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he's comforted here, and you're in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm can be fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may pass from here to us. And he said, This I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, he said to him, If they will not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. So, on another occasion, we've seen where Jesus says that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. That's what you have in this parable happening. There is a reversal. There is a reversal that occurs after death. And that's acknowledged. That's acknowledged here. Hey, you received your good things in life, and Lazarus received his bad things, but look where you are now. I mean, it's a haunting thing. If the Pharisees want to ridicule Jesus about what he says regarding riches and status, he's telling them. We've described like as if he's pulling back the curtain and letting us take a look into eternity. And now they probably would have ridiculed this as well. I mean, what does Jesus know about that sort of thing? Plenty. But he's trying to make a point that if you're going to try to exalt yourself, this is what's going to happen. If you're going to be justified by man and ignore God, this is what happens. And this, of course, the rich man is filled with nothing but regret for himself and overwhelming concern for those he's left behind. And Abraham makes the point that they've got Moses and the prophets, and there's this language in here, of course, that we recognize that there's something deeper to what Jesus is saying. Well, if someone would come back from the dead, then they would surely listen. And no, he says if that's not the case, of course, someone would come back from the dead. And Jesus is going to do that in the future. Now, in Jesus' ministry, we've seen where we've seen some people be raised from the dead, and I'd sure like to know a little more about them and their experience. But he's making the point that our lives and our use, for the Pharisees at least, their use of the Scriptures mattered, didn't it? It mattered. Abraham is making the point that, hey, the Scriptures, they're good enough. They were good enough. You just ignored them. The Pharisees have ignored them. They've misused them. And it's going to lead to their eternal demise, is what he's saying. And as far as the future was concerned, Abraham says, no, they've got Moses and the prophets. The Scriptures, they're capable of creating the kind of heart that would bring salvation. The kind of heart that ultimately would lead them to Jesus. As so many people of different character, of a different kind of heart, have been led to Jesus in his ministry. Do you have anything you'd like to say? I know the rich man and Lazarus, everybody's pretty familiar with that.
You said it, I never thought about that, but at verse 30, actually it did happen. I mean, it was Lazarus. I mean, and they did repent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it made the point. Even when I do send someone back from the dead, which is Lazarus,
Yeah.
instead of repenting, they doubled down to kill Jesus.
Yeah,
And
that's
Lazarus.
right. That's what they. Yeah, that's a good point.
So that makes us a point right there. They did it.
Yeah, yeah.
They probably saw that too.
Well, and he's not the only one that Jesus
Well, that's true.
raised from the dead.
He was the one that was probably most.
That seems to be the most well known. Yeah, I was thinking when we talked earlier about when Jesus caught the funeral procession coming out of town, and he did it there too. Yeah.
I can help to think even, though we're talking more monetarily and status that way, that this also goes to his argument of who's the greatest and all that, you know, you have all this knowledge, but that's not, the goal is not to be like the Pharisees, that people looking up to you and think you're something.
Yeah.
You know, you're still gonna have to be willing to humble yourself and share this with everyone, or you'll still, I mean, there's lots of examples, well, I did this for you, it's your heart wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I feel like even though that may not have been a crux, it still hits other points. that
It
you talked
fits.
on.
Yeah, it fits into that theme for sure. Anything else? All right. Piece of cake. 17. 17. Forgiveness, more easy stuff, right? So he says to his disciples, temptations to sin are sure to come, but woe to the one through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and were cast into the sea, than that he should cause one of these little ones to sin. Pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day and turns to you 7 times saying, I repent, you must forgive him. The apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, if you had faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you'd say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Will any one of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him, when he's come to the field, come at once and recline at the table? Will he not after rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink? And afterward, you will eat and drink. Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty. So in this section, you know, we're dealing with issues of, well, in the chapter, we're dealing with issues of discipleship, gratitude, and the future. Jesus is going to say quite a bit here, and the scene even changes. I still think that this part of 17 has been discussing. Here, we shouldn't think about just temptation generally, but Jesus kind of comes at it from a different angle and thinks about the one who's that? Can be, and how would they fit?
In setting the kind of example for the rest of the people that was, off base.
Mm-hmm.
And they were leading everybody with the impression that their righteousness was the kind of righteousness that everybody ought to have, and they were misleading people.
Yeah, they're misleading the people. Temptation is understood basically in 2 ways. The first way we typically think it's enticement. The other way is adversity. And Jesus is talking more in terms of adversity here. So he seems to be concerned about the one who's going to get in somebody's way. He's going to get in somebody's way. He's going to make it harder for them to get to the kingdom, to get to Jesus. The Pharisees certainly did that. They were making it very, very difficult. They were standing in the way. They were the stumbling block in that way. And I mean, here's how big's a millstone? It's big. It's big. I mean, you're talking about something that weighs 1,000 pounds. And you've seen millstones, I'm sure. They're enormous, and I don't think Jesus could have been more emphatic about the point, right? If you're going to he says this in terms of somebody who would harm one of these little children. He says it'd be better if a millstone were tied around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Just putting you as far away from God as one could conceive in the mind. So there's a very clear image that's given there. Jesus has absolutely no tolerance for somebody who would get in the way of another's salvation. That person is going to be dealt with strongly here. But he says, pay attention to yourselves. Now that's interesting. So maybe some were thinking that, that the Pharisees need to hear this. It's almost like, well, he's going to deal with them, but what about you? Pay attention to yourself. We don't like to pay attention to ourselves, right? We like to talk about other people's problems, and comparing ourselves for the sake of elevating ourselves. But that seems to be the problem that the Pharisees have, right? We don't want to think like that. So we need to pay attention to ourselves, as Jesus says here. And then he starts talking about forgiveness, which is strange, given what we've been seeing here. I think we could make the point that the Pharisees were unforgiving, but that kind of attitude is certainly not limited to them. It's very, very difficult for us to be forgiving in the way that Jesus was, and forgiveness is a big subject. Usually, when I teach about forgiveness, somebody comes up to me after I preach and say, "You didn't say." It's like, yes, I don't need a lecture on the topic. You can't cover. I haven't changed my mind about anything. Sometimes people think that. It's just a big topic. Here, he thinks about that someone has sinned. He says, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Don't hold it against him, but forgive him, and you're gonna receive him. And if it's 7 times in a day, Jesus uses that to make this point that your forgiveness has to be complete. That it's no matter how often it's sought, it's to be given. How many times in a day have we sought forgiveness of our sins when we've gone to God in prayer? Do you keep a score for yourself? We probably don't. You just imagine how many times we've asked God for forgiveness. The number would probably be staggering if we knew the number. And Jesus says, well, if someone asks, give it to them. And I have to appreciate the apostles' reaction to that. Now, here, just a minute ago, when Jesus said something that seemed far-reaching, the Pharisees ridiculed it. Here's another reaction. The apostles say, Lord, increase our faith. What do you think they meant by that?
We're not there, what you're telling us to do.
We're not there in what you're telling us to do? Yeah, that could be part of it. Tell us more. Yeah, tell us more.
I was looking in 14 of 16, he's talking to the Pharisees, and in 17:1 it says disciples, and then in verse 5 it's apostles. Is the disciples and the apostles different there?
Well, we know who the apostles are, so we know the group that he's that reacts to that. Any other thoughts about what they're implying about Lord, increase our faith? I think what you said is probably part of it. I've thought that they're recognizing the challenge of his teaching. He's just somebody seeking our forgiveness, not somebody who hurts us and doesn't care. He's talking about somebody who's seeking it, who wants reconciliation. And they're not where they need to be. They're acknowledging it, the challenge of it. To do that requires faith in Jesus. There's more to faith in Jesus than just acknowledging him for who he is. That's a huge step to take. to acknowledge who he truly is. That's part of what he's trying to do. Once you acknowledge who he is, then you can start focusing on his message, about the kind of life he wants us to lead. Now, the teaching of Jesus here on forgiveness, of course, is just going to grow, and a great deal of enlightenment is going to come when he goes to the cross. They're going to realize the full extent of the forgiveness that Jesus is offering. And he certainly is our model for that. Jesus makes this point, it fits the sort of the extreme way he makes this point. It's sort of like the millstone in a negative sense, and then here from a positive sense, he says, if you have faith like the mustard seed, you just say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and you'll be able to do that. Saying their faith is lacking at this point. They're acknowledging that, but if they have just a little faith, it's enough for it to grow. And that's sort of how faith is, right? Faith is just enough for us to follow. And if we take a couple steps, that we get closer, the faith gets stronger, and now we can take a couple more. And you just keep doing that throughout the course of your life. I think I've heard people use the illustration of like your headlights, right? Your headlights don't show you the whole road. They only show you so far, and you drive forward. And those headlights are keep showing you a little more ground, and before you know it, you get to where you need to be. And that's what faith is. Faith is not having a complete understanding. Faith is not having all the answers. That if you had all the answers, you wouldn't need faith. Okay? Jesus is saying if you had just a little faith, it'll grow, and you're going to be able to see great things accomplished. And I think the apostles, and I'm sure you'd agree, the apostles got to see this. They got to see this in their lives. Because the men that we've been reading about in the Gospel of Luke become very different men. To your point on Sunday, I think you made that point on Sunday. you take credit. Just take it. They became very different men in the book of Acts than what you see in the book of Luke. That's because their faith grew and increased.
So Christ, he gave them their request. Increase our faith. Takes time.
It takes time.
They went through a lot.
Yes. It is interesting that he doesn't just make them these superhero figures, He doesn't do that at all.
Like patience. It doesn't come for free.
Patience doesn't come for free. Yeah. So.
Well, he wraps it all up in that next section with tying in being the steward. So just growing to that mindset, like it's small at first, but when you realize you're really just a servant of his, then you're going to stop looking for gratitude for yourself because nothing burns. With all that you've done, you realize, what more could I do? I just did what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. It's a very different attitude than the lost sons we talked about, who wanted something. That was their motivation. We're going to get something out of this, out of our Father. Here it's, hey, when you've done everything that was asked, everything was required, you just did what you were supposed to do. Now, what we do get something. We do get something from that, but it's often not what is top of mind. It's often not what we're after. My kids, it happened tonight at dinner. They were hassling me about, wanting some money for chores. They do something, they want some money. And we've had this conversation before. We'll have it in the future, And you say they think they don't get anything, right? They do what you ask them to do, but they think, well, what do we get? So you get to enjoy this house and us in it. You laugh, but that's what you get. So what do we get as Christians? What do we get? We're promised that we're going to get to enjoy God's new world with Him. Like, that's what we get. Does that sound appealing to you? You know, we can understand that, I think, in terms of our families. And it's interesting that God's the one who gave us a family. I wonder what that's about. What's he trying to teach us through family? I think part of what he's trying to teach us is here's what you could get. You could get to live in my new world with me in peace and just enjoy it all. No. You know the apostles. Let me sit on your left hand and on your right hand. That's what they want. They want all of these little things that, in comparison to being with God in His new world forever, doesn't even begin to compare. That stuff is trivial. Jesus is on a completely different level, and that's what he's trying to get them to see, and they're going to see it in time. They just need to keep following. Cindy?
You made me think that we always want to get rewarded, but we never want to pay the price for what we've done wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what it is. God forgave us of that huge debt.
Yes. Yeah. So we don't realize what he's so often. We just we think in temporal terms, right? And we're just humans, so that's understandable. Jesus is always trying to get us to see in much bigger terms. Well, we're about out of time. Here in 11 to 19 is this interaction here. The scene changes. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and we know why he's on his way to Jerusalem. And along the way, he cleanses 10 lepers. And wouldn't you know it, only one of them thanked him, and the guy that said thank you was a Samaritan.
No way.
And by this time, we're not at all surprised, right? Because this is the kind of thing Luke is always showing us. It's the Samaritan who's grateful, and the others just sort of go on their way. And there's some great lessons here in terms of faith and gratitude, which certainly work hand in hand. If you don't have faith, you're not going to be grateful. And if you don't have faith and you're not grateful, well, you're going to trust in yourself. And that will cause us to head off in the wrong direction. And that's what happens. These 9, they go off in a different direction, right? And the one, he comes back and he says thank you. And Jesus is grateful to him for that. Here's a man who seems to get it. The Samaritan of all people. All right, well, we'll move along here. I know we've got just 2 sessions left, and my plan tentatively is to talk about the crucifixion and the resurrection. Luke does some things that are unique to his gospel, and so we'll pick some of that out as we try to wrap up the book next week. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Finally.
Hey.
How are you?
You know,
everybody can count.
Huh?
Even the little people.
Really?
It doesn't matter what.
Everybody is?
Hey, count what are you doing? You're real jolly person.
So I
Yeah, he probably was.
Sure was, Mom, before she never did get to know these people, except just passing the word if somebody came through or something.
Cool, Cindy. Good.
Okay. You doing good?
Doing okay.
Yeah.
After I came out of volleyball, and I see both of them before I give you my opinion. That means you just like it.
Oh, you know, that we know how to read them.
Like, I know how to, it's my dad, I know how to read them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.